Please introduce yourself. Tell the audience what you do in your company. Start with Gabriel.
Sure. Gabriel Charvat, Dun Bradstreet. I lead a team called Data Quality Insights, and we are literally the nerds in white coats that walk around the data factory.
Sara Sprague. I work for Wells Fargo. I'm currently leading our data quality testing and risk and controls organization. I generally tell people it's my job to find problems before they become bigger problems.
Hi, everybody. Nishith Trivedi from Pfizer. I lead the enterprise data governance and global MDM team. So, which means everything from master data, reference data, ontologies, taxonomies, and Calibra, Alation, like data catalogs. So really just enabling data to enable our data strategy.
My first question is to you, Sara. Like when you think about trusted data, people are looking at the accuracy of data. What does trust mean beyond just the accuracy of data?
All right. Well, I think it's hard to take accuracy off the table, right? So I think when I think about trusted data, it's all about knowing with confidence that I'm using the right data for the right things. I think that comes with really like three major things that you should be considering. The first is definitely going to be accuracy. But I'm going to suggest this accuracy beyond our traditional definition of accuracy, right? Everybody thinks about my normal DQ rules. Do I have a null? Is it proper format? Is it the data value I expected? I think in the new paradigm, we have to start thinking about consistency and predictability, right, in terms of accuracy. So is it consistent with how I trained my model in the first place, right? If I'm feeding data to a model that's not how I trained that model, then I'm not going to get the results that I expected. And then secondly, predictability, right? I want my data to be predictable. I want to know what it's going to look like. And if I see major spikes or major changes in that data, obviously that's going to impact the way that it's going to perform when I feed it into a model. I think the second thing I'm going to consider when I'm talking about trusted data is the customer's perspective, right? Did they give me permission to use this data in the way that I wanted to? And am I using this data in a way that is beneficial to that customer, right? I would say that if I am a consumer of the data and I'm leveraging it, I should have confidence that data is something that the customer would want me to touch, right? And then the third piece is really looking at it from a business perspective, right? Is this data allowable? Do I have the permission to use it? Are there contractual obligations, regulatory obligations that would prevent me from using that? I want to know when I use that data, I want to trust that has already been cared for by the people who are stewards of that data, and I can move on with whatever it is I want to do with it.
Awesome. That's great. Nishith, any thoughts on this?
Yeah. At Pfizer, like we were, specifically in R&D for pharma, big pharma in general, they have this concept called fair data. And we last year were branding our data as Fair Plus. Fair is findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable, and then plus is like the data quality accuracy. Now we've kind of rebranded as, hey, we need to move from Fair Plus to AI ready data. So it's all of that. Plus now you need to kind of remove bias. You need to kind of optimize your data for, the vector database embeddings, semantics, prompt engineering. So kind of just going beyond just good data quality, accessible to everybody for analytics to now make it AI ready, make it machine readable.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
So it's Fair plus plus.
Gabriel, based on what he said, clearly your enterprise is very involved in building near real-time or real-time data products. Tell us a little bit about, how do you embed quality in your processes without slowing down innovation?
Sure. So really briefly, I'm going to throw a lot of numbers at people.
Sure.
Let's see if, because you're all numbers people, I'm sure. But so at Dun Bradstreet, I'm sure you're familiar, but we have company data, and we have data about 600 million records. Each of them, is sourced from 220 different countries. And so to get that data, we have about 37,000 sources and growing. And so we have a lot of coming in, and it could be garbage in, and it could just be great data. And I tend to think, I love what you said, Sara, my job is to find problems. And so building a culture of problems aren't bad, problems are actually good, because if we find them now, then they don't impact the customer who's buying this data from us. So, very briefly, we have 4 pillars. I love the title is pillars. We have pillars. There's pillars everywhere. But we have 4 pillars that drive the data quality framework, and it's very domain driven. It's not product driven. It's domain driven, so that we're thinking about the quality of the entire data. The inventory data is what we call it, to distinguish from like corporate data, right? And so we've got domain data owners who are subject matter experts who define critical data elements for their domain. They think about 8 dimensions. I love what you said about consistency and predictability, because we almost have this 9th dimension called volatility, which is the opposite, the other side of that coin. And then it comes to my team to do that measurement. And so we're measuring data at rest, to get to your question, and we're also measuring data in motion. So briefly, the third group takes the insights from the data quality measurement and goes to all those 220 operations teams to help them to implement data improvement plans and prioritize the data improvement plans based on business impact, of course. Finally, we've got client insight at the end, and it sort of becomes this infinite cycle of continuous improvement of the framework. So when we talk about that data in motion, we have 2 programs. It's called Data Shield for data in motion. Data at rest is Data Watch, and Acceldata supports the measurements in the 2 different paradigms. Data Watch is all about measure the holistic view of the entire data set. And it's very traditional data quality. It's we're looking for what could go wrong that we know what it is, right? So finally, to answer your question, Data Shield is all about measuring each record as it comes in, and where Data Watch is level 1 is good, level 2 is acceptable, level 3 needs improvement. Data Shield is more about, is this record good enough for a generalized use case, not for a specific use case? And so we either reject or quarantine that piece of information, or we allow it through, with a warning, right? And so that's how that is happening. Those warnings go back to the operations team, but they're also visible for products to understand if that data is usable for their use case.
Awesome. Sara, obviously, as a large bank, you have a lot of data coming in with so many different hops, data going through hops.
Yep.
So in a sense, data is almost always in motion, right? To a great extent.
Absolutely.
Tell us a little bit more about how you all handle that in the bank.
Yeah, so it's a struggle. And, being in a big organization, we have a lot of data aggregators. Data is moving through the organization. It's multi-hop. By the time you're actually touching an aggregator, it may have hopped 5, 6 times. You don't necessarily know where it is. So for us, I think it's to focus on the data and motion controls as well. We've got a standardized framework that's embedded in our Autosys jobs that's allowing us to measure based on a framework. We have 7 things that we're looking for. And it's when something goes wrong, it's getting that immediate notification. For us, that means immediate notification and automated ServiceNow tickets, right? That ability to immediately make sure your incident management team is aware. Here recently, we actually took a step back and said, hey, this is really great. We're able to stop issues. We're able to stop that data from progressing through that data lineage when it's gone wrong. But the bigger problem is that we're solving for this one at a time, right? It's very like, hey, here's a problem solve, here's a problem solve, here's a problem solve. So essentially you end up with this like pattern of Band-Aids going across your network. So we said, hey, we want to take a step back and start thinking through what are the patterns that we're seeing? How do we put essentially this notion of data observability on top of something where we don't necessarily have a data observability platform? And so we have created a BI platform now that is actually looking at patterns and trends. So am I seeing this happening at the same time period every Thursday, right? Well, maybe I've got some job contention there that I need to take an extra look at, or, hey, am I seeing more problems in one platform than the other? Perhaps we should go back and have a warm and fuzzy discussion with the individuals who own that platform and try to figure out what's happening.
That's great to hear. I want to pull on a thread that Joe DeSantos had mentioned earlier today. He talked about, 650 agents or as many agents as there are problems. Even if it's not that extreme, clearly with the agentic framework, there is a lot more movement of data or data being consumed in so many different points, right? You can't kind of lock it down in specific points. So for you, Nishith, so I would like to know from a governance standpoint, does the paradigm shift fundamentally, right? From a centralized to a more localized governance where the data is and where the data moves as opposed to looking up to some sort of a control point? That's
certainly. I mean, as a big corporate company, we have 10 data lakes, and so of course it's decentralized. Even within a particular domain, right? Like we still have a customer governance team versus a product governance team versus, other areas, data quality team separate, right? So I think the goal is really how do we kind of make sure we have data quality, observability, along with our, data governance tools, right? Like collaboration, where we have metadata, we want to have lineage, we want to have some of the other aspects of security policy and stuff. How do we kind of integrate all of that together? And then how do we build that cohesive story? So, and quick shout out to my team here. Marcus and Kevin are part of our data quality and Calibra team, and Andrew is part of our data lake team, right? So we're working together on like a vision of how do we kind of build a machine which builds a machine? How do we put in our metadata first in kind of a data catalog? It's, and then using that metadata, right? We are building ETL pipelines now. The next stage is going to be phase 2 is, hey, once we build ETL pipelines using the metadata, we also, and this is like automated metadata, right? So the ETL pipeline is written based on what you put in Calibra. Next stage is we want to put in data quality rules there. We need Calibra and Acceldata to talk together. So we need your APIs to work, and then in the future, your agents to work together. So we want to kind of get that, and then that way, like, as the data goes through the pipeline end to end, right, we can see, okay, where, at each hop, right, what are the data quality issues? Hey, what can the customer team versus product team versus ontology team, what can they go and resolve? Ideally, the agents can resolve some of it automatically. Some of it will be taken to data storage. So that's kind of the vision, and really making all the different platforms and their APIs and all interchanged. That's kind of a key part of the vision.
Okay. More forward-leaning question. I'll start with you, Gabriel. Are data catalogs going to be relevant in the future, right? Are they going to be more embedded in existing solutions, like what we saw earlier this morning? The notion of a catalog sort of comes with, other management solutions. And to your point, I think I was talking to you earlier, there's a lot of metadata flowing around. There's a lot of duplication of metadata. So where do you envision sort of the future, right? In terms of the whole catalog, quality, governance, there's just so many different moving parts.
Well, I think it's both. I mean, as people have talked about all throughout today, and gosh, everything I've read for the last year, AI projects are incredibly dependent on the quality of the data that's used, right? Everybody knows that. And at the same time, we're also super excited that governance processes will become less onerous, less hard to sell to executives, stakeholders, et cetera. So it has to be both. It has to be both and. And I mean, when I think about the promise of something like agentic MDM, but built on trusted data like we have, sorry for the plug, I had to do it, like what we have at DNB, it's just incredibly powerful. And for as long as I've been around governance, it's always been not just hard to sell, but also hard to complete and hard to do right and hard to finish, right? So
why do you think that is?
Well, massive scale, also doesn't produce revenue. So when you take that combination of it's a lot of work, and it requires some specialized people to really think through these things. But I guess the word of caution is that the data steward doesn't go away. The data steward actually becomes more important. And we can't just set and forget these things, even as we start to build a lot of great agents. We have to have these humans working with the agents. And so what I think is the big challenge for me and my team this year is how do we get answers out of those agents that are actually convincing to the humans and are actually have enough context and have enough maybe ranking of a couple possibilities, right? And here are all the various possibilities of what's the right answer. Well, no, I don't want a machine to tell me the right answer if I've spent my last 25 years of my career learning about how to define that, right? So how do we create agents that are talking to our people in a way that makes them feel empowered? And also, of course, they train that agent, and then it becomes sort of this virtuous cycle where eventually it can make decisions and we all trust it, right?
Great. So, for you, as a bank, obviously controls are extremely important. I think you said it's hard to convince. I think it'll be a lot easier in your situation to convince, as I'm sure it is for you too. How do you kind of envision that sort of going through a transformation with agentic AI? There's a lot more, independent actions happening in multiple parts. Citizen development of agents are going to be a reality soon, right? So what do you think in terms of like the future that holds for you as a bank in terms of controls?
Yeah, so I think when you're talking about controls, and again, trusted data, trust is all about understanding where your boundaries are and protecting those boundaries. And as a control organization, like that's our job, is to protect those boundaries. As we're shifting into this new paradigm, right, the boundaries and the way that we protect those boundaries is shifting slightly. So now we're going to be really more focused on the inputs and the outputs, right? And establishing guardrails in between. So that starts with sitting down in your organization and having a risk assessment and determining what are those guardrails that you want to protect, right? That's probably the biggest thing. The second thing is really understanding what the inputs are, right? So to your point, yeah, getting good solid metadata, doing the housekeeping to really clean up your data, to establish a really clean baseline. Those are things that we have been crying out and saying, yes, this is what we want to do, particularly for those like lesser important use cases that don't have the regulatory obligation. But it's always been competitive with the things that do generate revenue, right? Or the shiny penny, you know. The reality is when we're talking about AI, you're talking about ML, it's not going to work if you don't have quality data up front. So all of a sudden, all of us who have been saying, hey, please invest in me, right? All of a sudden, we just became really important. And we have this business case now to finally go back and do the data cleanup. That's something that we're really investing in my organization right now. So I think going back and understanding what that baseline is, cleaning up your data, getting good solid metadata. I don't think that's going away. At least my regulators aren't telling me that it's not going to go away. They want to know that information. That's all really important. There's another piece of this, right, where it's like, hey, wait a minute, AI/ML can actually really help us out, right? And data observability platforms can start to help us out because we're able to start seeing things, seeing patterns in our data that insinuate risk that we have not been able to see in the past, right? We're doing a massive Acceldata implementation right now, right? We're now able to see things in data sets we didn't have the time to see before, or we didn't have the ability to see before, particularly in pattern recognition, which is where risk crops up that you may not be able to control in a traditional sense. So from a control standpoint, like really leveraging that. And then the last piece I'm going to say is monitor the monitoring. Right? It's not set it and forget it. We all want it to be set it and forget it, right? Plug on that data observability platform. Hey, you know what? It's going to give me a ServiceNow ticket if something goes wrong, right? Like that's the wrong answer. We have to have some sort of monitoring on the monitoring to understand, hey, do I have a lot of ServiceNow tickets being open? Do I see patterns in these tickets? Do I have KRIs that are indicating like, hey, maybe my customers are unhappy. That could be a data problem for me, right? So again, I think to really bring it back, it's inputs, outputs, understanding the guardrails, and as a control organization, protecting those guardrails at all costs.
Nishith, picking up on that, like tell us the perspective from, more from a life sciences pharma company, right?
Yeah, I think specifically in the R&D space, right? Like there's a lot of work right now. How do we speed up the value chain, right? Instead of 10 years to develop a drug, can we do it in 5? Can we do it in 4? And so every part of the value chain is being looked at, and really to speed it up, right? You really need that good quality data, specifically for, like FDA submissions, right? We have any given product which goes through FDA, EMA, 8,000 documents needs to be submitted, right? And like every document has to be human read. We're trying to, bring Gen AI to the table to say, hey, can we at least draft these documents, right? And then how do you do version control, right? Like how do you kind of make sure that in research, if somebody has a compound or asset, right? And that's now like a clinical trial candidate, and and somebody's using a medical term, right? Like all of these things are tied together. So we really need to bring in good ontologies and kind of synonyms and stuff like that, because what you don't want is like you send a report to the FDA saying everything's great, and then your Gen AI was not able to read some adverse event, symptoms, and like when the drug goes out, right, there's something happening. So those are kind of things that are very important. So getting the data right, being able to kind of make sure all the various synonyms for the biological processes, the compounds, molecules, etc., is like rock solid.
And what's your hope in terms of compression of time? Like, what's your targets? Like, where do you think you're going to land?
I think all pharmas are trying to like speed up like 2x. That's the goal, everybody. I mean, we'll see where we get there. But
Okay.
Right now, I mean, we're definitely trying to bring we're going outside of the standard enterprise companies to look at like various innovative companies in Silicon Valley to see who is really at the forefront of innovation for unstructured data management.
Awesome. We're going to move to a lightning round. With AI, Gen AI, obviously there is a lot of implications for employees, processes, everything. What is one non-negotiable cultural change that you're going to embrace or you would recommend? And I'm going to start with you, Sara.
I think, again, it's going to be that focus on inputs and outputs. Don't get lost on the shiny penny. I think in organizations, whenever we have technologies, it's going to, everybody gets really focused on that shiny penny, and it's really exciting to go out and invest in it. I think it's less of a culture shift and just a general reminder that the foundation of having controls and focusing on what you're using when you're playing with that shiny penny has to be just as important as going out and developing the new cool innovation.
How about you, Gabriel?
So it's actually something that I think we should be careful not to change, which is discipline and having a good a structure about how we choose our projects and how we think through the outputs of those projects. Always starting with the outputs. And so the Navy SEALs have this saying, "Slow is smooth, smooth is fast," and it means not only that they train and train and train, but also that they have thought deeply about every possibility and that they have the plan in place. And so what I'm finding with AI projects is that the gap between a POC and an actual implementation is far larger than any kind of project that we've seen before. So I can do a POC myself on my computer in an hour. That doesn't mean that whatever cool insight that I just found is actually worth making a project out of. And so a lot of careful change management, a lot of careful thinking through the project, so that just like the Navy SEALs, when something comes up that's not expected, you've got your structures in place and your discipline, and that will allow for reduction of risk. I do tend to be pretty risk averse. So, how do we prevent ourselves from making really terrible mistakes? We know even if there was such a thing as perfect data, LLMs and now agents are going to be able to take perfect data and make terrible mistakes, right? And so how do we have structures in place to make sure we're not doing that to our business?
It's like a human in the loop, or what are you thinking?
Well, I think human in the loop, but also structure. So I love what you said, monitor the monitors,
Yes.
right? So every project, starting with what are the KPIs that are the business outcome we're looking for, and what are the KPIs that are actually the possible problems, and measuring them before you start so that it's great at the end, you can say I had some progress, but also so that you're watching for those problems, so that you're kind of paranoidly watching for those problems.
Cool. Nishith, why don't you close it out with your thoughts on this?
I would say there's a lot of, people throwing out business cases for AI and ROIs, and then 5,000% ROI. And we're like, okay, so how much of this invested in the data product, right, behind the AI product? And typically it costs zero. They didn't even think about the data product. It's just the work to do the AI, right? So it's really investing in data products to me, making sure that part of the culture is data first, right? And AI first, but data first as well.
Data first before AI. Awesome. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.